figures on waiting time in hospitals in England are out later this morning. It's clear that ministers expect them to show some much needed good news about what's happening in the NHS. Perhaps a fall in the number of patients waiting 4 hours to be seen. If that happens, it might be due in part to financial incentives to get those waiting times down. How are they working? And do those stats tell us the whole story? Let's talk to the President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, Dr. Adrian Boyle. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Are you anticipating some better signs of what's happening in A&E?
So I think we might see a small improvement in 4-hour target performance, which I think would be welcome, but we would be, small improvements from, in the low 70s to the mid 70s is a little difficult to celebrate when we know that we have so many people staying for very long stays.
By 70s, you're referring to the percentage of patients that don't have to wait 4 hours.
So the number of patients who are seen and either admitted or discharged within 4 hours from registration.
So there's still lots of people who will miss the target, in other words. And you're also concerned, aren't you, at the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, that some people wait a very long time indeed?
Yes, and one of the problems of having a target like this with a low threshold, because when the target was initially designed, it was set at 95%, and that applied to everyone. What we're seeing now is all the operational effort and attention is pushed on people who can be sent home. The people who need to be admitted end up staying a long time. Last year, 2023, 1.5 million people spent more than 12 hours from time of arrival in our emergency rooms, and that's not good for them. It's too long.
Let's be clear what you're saying. I think you're saying that in order to get the numbers down, because they're politically embarrassing, what ends up happening is that there's an incentive, an actual financial incentive for hospitals to get the wellest patients out of A&E quickly, and that may allow the sickest patients to wait for more time.
Yes, this is creating an unintended consequence. The longer patients are stuck and still having these long stays.
On the other hand, if you're a politician, you might say, look, these things work. People, doctors in particular, often complain about targets, but when ministers say in this government, they used to say it under Labour governments as well, look, we'll set a target, we'll put a bit more effort in, we might put a little bit more money in, hey presto, things do get better quicker.
And we need a target. There's no doubt. We've tried an experiment where we actually didn't have a 4-hour target, and in the hospitals which had that, it was really difficult. And we can still see that the hospitals that took part in the pilot, where they didn't have a 4-hour target, to see what happened, they ended up at long stays. But the longer stays actually ended up being on the worst patients. The problem by setting the target so low is you actually create this very uneven playing field with lots of attention on people cut fingers, sprained ankles, and not nearly the right level of operational attention on people with strokes and heart attacks who need to be admitted into hospital.
So what's your overview about where we are now with the NHS? The Prime Minister yesterday said things are slowly starting to get better. Is that how it seems to you?
So we still think it's very difficult in emergency care. We always expect to see a bit of improvement as we go into as we come out of winter. There is a bit of improvement. Stuff around same-day emergency care is better. We welcome that, but we still haven't got it right about these long stays. People seem to be admitted to hospital.
Dr. Adrian Boyle, President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. Thank you.
We have just slipped past 17 minutes past 7. There's a warning from one of Thames Water's creditors that nationalising the UK's biggest water company could mean other providers lose out on investment. Will's back with more on this.
Yeah, that's right, Johnny. This, of course, has been up for discussion, hasn't it, because of the trouble with Thames Water's operating company, Kemble, and real financial difficulty. Recently it failed to pay interest on £400 million worth of debt, and also announced that it won't be able to make a £190 million loan repayment due at the end of this month. Royal London Asset Management holds bonds in Thames' operating company Campbell, and Shalin Shah is a senior fund manager at Royal London. Shalin, morning.
Good morning.
First of all, just explain this through for people so they know what we're talking about here. Thames basically sells bonds to companies like you, and you get a return from them over time.
Yes, that's right. So Thames Water, like a lot of other water companies, fund their essential investments in improving the network through not only debt investments but also equity investments, and these are long-term in nature.
And your concern here is what?
So the concern that we have at the present time is that as a regulated water company, any shift in political sentiment that ultimately, at the present time remains quite heightened in terms of political risks, any shift that ultimately could lead to a less stable regulatory regime could impact investment across the wider UK water sector, the wider UK infrastructure.
And by that, you're talking about, say, like a quasi-nationalisation, so the government having to step in if the Thames's current shareholders and creditors don't, if it can't keep going through their support, the government might have to step in and support it financially.
So it really depends on how, if it does step in and how it steps in. I think the key issue is around undermining the established concept of a stable regulatory regime, because long-term investors are relying on this stability to enable further investment, and that investment is much needed at the present time.
Should those investors be the priority, though? What about the 16 million customers who might see their bills up by 40%, which would be the other option on the table?
Yes, so that is the heightened political risk I mentioned earlier, which is around really finding the balance between maintaining affordability on customer bills with...
I mean, is that possible? With you guys not losing out on your investment? I mean, is that possible? Is that a balancing act that can be done?
So the regulatory regime that is in place does allow bill rises to effectively allow the network to operate, but your question is it possible to not allow bill rises? Now that is a key challenge, because Thames Water is not alone. All the water companies are asking for significant...
She claimed that the Labour government could deliver more buses and more bus routes without spending any extra money. In the next hour, the Health Secretary about the Tory promise to cut taxes, even though the government's missing its targets to resolve the NHS crisis. I've been speaking to a former Chancellor about this big question, Philip Hammond. He says that neither big party is now being open about the pressures they're going to face, not just day-to-day demands to spend more, but what he refers to as the 3 Ds: the demographic challenge, decarbonisation and defence. In other words, the problems of an ageing population, a warming planet and an increasingly unsafe world. I've been speaking to Hammond for the latest edition of Today podcast, which asks a simple question: where will the money come from?
We now live in a world where tax is very high, record levels. Borrowing is at very high, indeed record levels. And yet we face some very large and structural challenges on the public spending and public finances front.
Do we need a more honest conversation?
The challenge with the more honest conversation in a democracy is, as all politicians know, voters don't want to hear this. They want politicians to resolve it for them. They want politicians to find a way around it. And so politicians either focus on the economic solution, which is a productivity revolution, or they focus on things like improving efficiency of public services at the margin, or collecting a bit more tax from people who perhaps are not paying as much as they should be. I think the real issue here is to get the public to engage with the opportunity of technological innovation across the economy being a way of raising our productivity game. But the truth is, we haven't done very well on productivity for quite a number of years, certainly since the global financial crisis.
Beware, the former Chancellor is telling you, of anyone who tells you that you can pay for promises simply by cracking down on tax avoidance or more efficiency. Now, Philip Hammond was kicked out of the Conservative Party by Boris Johnson for defying him over Brexit. He is now back and sitting in the House of Lords, though he has a busy business career. Does he, I asked him, look at his party's low poll ratings and see a crisis looming?
To be honest with you, Nick, and I am a former politician, and I don't think of myself as being involved in the day-to-day political debate anymore. I think the formidable problem is for our democratic politics, because I can easily envisage, and the polls are certainly suggesting, that the Conservative Party will take a pasting at the next election. But do I think that the Labour Party has a magic bullet that will solve all the problems we've been talking about today? Not at all. And they too will have to deal with this excruciating problem of ever rising demand for ordinary public spending, and then on top of it, the need to decarbonise and to rearm the country in the face of big existential threats.
That's just part of a much longer conversation with Philip Hammond. It's on this week's edition of the Today podcast. I know we're at risk of banging on about these podcasts, and some people don't listen to any at all. They're radio programs you can get on your phone. I mean, that's no more complicated than that. Just enhances your choice, gives you some chance for a longer conversation, perhaps a more reflective conversation than you sometimes get on the newspaper.
I mean, you've just got Philip Hammond to acknowledge that Conservatives are facing a pasting. But there's that more serious point, isn't there? That's that point that echoing, I think it was a Luxembourg Prime Minister said, we all know how to reform our countries, we just don't know how to get elected afterwards.
It's a great quote, isn't that? It's a great quote. I should have put that to Philip Hammond. You should present those programs. You'll have to deal with the kind of nearly inadequate version of that interview on BBC Sounds. That's where you get the Today podcast.
It is 24 minutes past 7.
Now, a once daily pill to treat migraines has been approved for use in England by the health spending watchdog NICE. How significant is that for tens of thousands of migraine sufferers? The pill is already in use in Scotland. The Conservative MP Dahina Davison gave up her role as a minister because of migraine attacks. She told MPs in a debate about the condition last month, and she spoke about its life-ruining impact.
Migraine is not just a headache. Migraine is a complex neurological spectrum condition for which headache is just one possible symptom. So this is a very strong early message to anyone suggesting you can cure a migraine attack with a couple of paracetamol. It's time to learn, and it is time to be better.
Well, let's talk to Rob Music, as Chief Executive of the Migraine Trust. Morning to you, Rob. Just spell out what Dahina was trying to say there, would you? There are people who just think it's a bit of a bad headache.
Absolutely right, and I think it's a huge stigma that has got to be quashed as soon as possible. It is much more than a headache. It's a severe and painful long-term neurological condition. Headache is a major feature, but there are many other symptoms, from disturbed vision, sensitivity to light, sounds, smells, feeling sick, being sick. Its worst case, it completely destroys quality of life. You have breakdown of social relationships, you can't work, financially you're massively impacted, and people just literally have nowhere to go. And that's why it's very positive to hear that NICE have approved a new treatment that hopefully will support people who live with chronic and episodic migraine.
You say hopefully. How important is this once a day pill? How many people is it likely to be able to help?
So the estimation is it could potentially help around 170,000 people. I mean, there are 10 million people who live with migraine, 1 million people who are chronic. So this is the estimation.
So it's not everybody, to be clear, and indeed I think you have to be prescribed it in hospital rather than by your own GP. Is that right?
With this particular one, yes. So, and you can't just give it straight away. So you would have had to have failed 3 other preventive treatments first before you were eligible for this one.
So this is at the end of the pathway for a patient. This isn't like reaching for a paracetamol or an aspirin.
Absolutely, and that's the way it is at the moment. I know there are conversations about should treatments like this be almost first line rather than end line, rather than being offered, because historically, before this and similar treatments that are available, the treatments that were for other conditions such as epilepsy, for depression, people offered beta blockers, quite nasty side effects. So that's why this is very important. I think the important thing also is it's very positive that we've got this announcement. We've got to make sure that for people who are eligible, that they are offered it as soon as they possibly can have it. So the Migraine Trust produced a report last year that showed there's a huge postcode lottery around people being able to access these treatments if eligible. And we want to see that inequity stopped as soon as possible, because what's the point in having a fantastic life-changing treatment if people can't access it?
Rob Music, Chief Executive of the Migraine Trust. Thanks for joining us.
It's 28 minutes past He'll
John and Nick, good morning to you. One of sport's greatest events, the Masters Golf Tournament, is scheduled to start at 1 o'clock today, and I've been chatting about it to our correspondent Ian Carter.
Scotty Scheffler is the hot favourite after the form that he's shown this year. There is the enduring question of Rory McIlroy. This is his 10th attempt to try and complete the career Grand Slam, become only the 6th golfer to win all 4 of the majors. He got a big boost this week from Tiger Woods, who said undoubtedly Rory McIlroy is going to be a Masters champion one day, and this was McIlroy's reaction to that assertion from Tiger Woods.
It's flattering. It's nice to hear, in my opinion, the best player ever to play the game say something like that. So does that mean that it's going to happen? Obviously not, but he's been around the game long enough to know that I at least have the potential to do it. And I mean, I've got the potential to do it too. It's not as if I haven't been a pretty good player for the last couple of decades. So yeah, it's nice to hear it when it comes out of his mouth.
And Ian, what about Woods himself, with all the injuries he's had and operations? Can he actually mount a serious challenge himself?
Well, if you ask him, he says yes. If it all comes together, he believes he could win a record equaling 6th green jacket. I think, in all honesty, it's a pretty fanciful notion when you consider that he hasn't completed a PGA Tour event since withdrawing through injury in the 3rd round of the Masters last year. And, when you listen to him these days, it's that enduring relationship, the deepness of that he has with this sport that is most striking.
I love golf. I do. I've always loved it. I'd love to compete. I think that's one of the reasons why I've had a successful career. I just love doing the work, logging the time in, and I love preparing, I love competing, and I love that feeling when everything's on fire with a chance to win, and you either do or you don't.
So who are you actually expecting to win?
Well, I think that Scotty Scheffler is a very, very justifiable short odds favourite. The question for me is how the LIV players are going to perform. You look at the likes of Jon Rahm, who'll be the defending champion, who has only played this diet of 54-hole golf this year. And then you look at Rory McIlroy, and you just wonder. Here's a little teaser for you, Gary. Rory McIlroy was the last player to sign in here. The caddy number is attributed to the point at which you sign in. That caddy number is number 89. What year was Rory McIlroy born in? 89. What number did the caddy bibs have for Sergio Garcia and Danny Willett's wins? 89. You just wonder in the 88th Masters, don't you?
You do. Let's hope he doesn't come 89th. 5 Live Sports Extra with Ian and the team. Commentary from 8 o'clock. The weather forecast for the day, I'm afraid, isn't very encouraging. Ipswich missed their chance to go top of the championship after drawing 0-0 with Watford. Barcelona are nicely on course for the semi-finals of the Champions League after a 3-2 win in Paris against PSG. Atletico Madrid defeated Borussia Dortmund 2-1. An interesting story ahead of this summer's Olympics. World Athletics have announced that they'll award £40,000 to athletes who win gold medals in Paris. We'll have more in an hour. As we previewed earlier, it's the start of the Grand National Race Meeting. Our entry selections for the feature race at 5 minutes to 3. Number 6, it's a horse called Shishkin. And then at 4:05, look out for number 12. It's On the Line.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Now, is there any connection between Gary announcing that he will one day leave us and that Emma Barnett is about to arrive on the programme? You're both here in studio.
Too true.
Answer. Emma, morning to you. Just tell us what you're doing for the moment, shall you?
Well, we'll stick with that, yes, because it is my last day presenting Woman's Hour before I join this mighty programme next month, and it's fair to say we've got quite a programme planned. I'll be catching up with one of the most remarkable women I've had the privilege of speaking to on Woman's Hour. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe will be in the studio. I'll also be marking the 90th birthday of the legendary American feminist, writer and journalist and trailblazing campaigner, all of those things. Gloria Steinem's on the programme and getting her take on reproductive rights, working with those you disagree with, and the power of community when it comes to the women's movement, and also getting her take on why America still hasn't had a female president. And as if that wasn't enough, we will have live music from the soulful wonder that is Rebecca Ferguson. So I would love for you to join me for my final Woman's Hour at 10 o'clock.
Emma, that may just be an emotional moment. The last
It
show.
may. I may have already tried to get it out this morning, and so I have my game face on. But I think when Rebecca Ferguson starts singing, it may all go to mark.
Good luck. with that. Look
Thanks,
forward
Emma.
to you joining us soon.
Very best of luck with the last show, Emma. Let's take a quick look at the weather. Sunny in the north today, cloudier with showers in the south, rain for some in the west come the evening. You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Johnny Diamond. It's 27 minutes to 8. Let's get a summary of the news with Alan Smith.
President Biden has promised ironclad support for Israel if the country's interests are targeted by Iran. He was speaking after Iran's supreme leader repeated that Israel would be punished for last week's airstrike on Tehran's consulate in Damascus, when 7 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard were killed. American media say a U.S. general will visit Israel today to discuss the situation. A 25-year-old man is to appear in court charged with the murder of a woman who was stabbed to death as she pushed her baby in a pram in Bradford on Saturday. Habiba Massoum is accused of killing Kulsum Akhtar, who was 27. The Home Secretary James Cleverly is coming under pressure from homeless charities to rethink plans to clamp down on what he describes as nuisance rough sleeping in England and Wales. He wants police to have the power to move on rough sleepers and issue a fine or arrest them. A letter signed by 37 charities says the measure risks stigmatising people who are forced to spend the night on the streets. South Korea's Liberal Opposition Party has won a landslide majority in the parliamentary election. The Democratic Party and its allies have secured 192 of 300 seats. The result is a crushing defeat for President Yoon Suk-yeol and his People Power Party. A court in Vietnam is to announce its verdict on one of the world's biggest bank fraud trials. The property tycoon Truong My Lan and 85 other defendants are accused of swindling billions of dollars from the Saigon Commercial Bank. If found guilty, she could face the death penalty. A new pill to treat migraines could soon become available on the NHS in England. The watchdog NICE says atogepant should be offered to people who have at least 4 migraine days a month and have tried at least 3 other treatments to no avail. And archaeologists excavating in the Roman city of Pompeii have uncovered stunning artworks in a villa. The walls of the property's large banqueting room are decorated with frescoes from Greek myths, while the floors are covered in mosaics.
Alan, thank you. It's 25 minutes to 8 now. 2 things are striking about the overnight news coming from the Middle East. First, the belief coming from US intelligence sources that an attack on Israel by Iran is imminent. Second, the fears that Iran may launch a direct attack on Israel in retaliation for the killing of its commanders in Syria last week, rather than using a proxy, say Hezbollah in Lebanon, to launch an attack on Israeli interests elsewhere in the region. Last night, President Biden tried to send a message to Tehran to pull back by promising what he called ironclad support for Israel.
They're threatening to launch a significant attack on Israel. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security.
I've been speaking to a man the President knows well, Ben Rhodes, who was Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama. I asked him what it would mean if there were a direct attack by Iran on Israel.
I think that would be a major escalation. I mean, we've seen Iran and Israel trading these attacks in third countries, but we have not seen Iran take a direct shot at Israel. And given the already volatile situation, it is almost certain that Israel would feel compelled to attack Iranian soil in response. And now we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it's possible that Iran could attack, say, an Israeli diplomatic facility, which in its view, I think would be in reprisal for the attack on the sovereign Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria. But if it is on Israel's territory, I think we can expect an Israeli attack on Iranian territory.
And if that happened, we'd expect US support for that.
Well, yes, I think, you see in President Biden's comments today a desire to send a message, but I think that message is first and foremost an effort to deter Iran from taking action. I'm sure that U.S. officials are pressing any country that has a line into the Iranians to get them to de-escalate and to avoid that kind of direct confrontation. I think the U.S. would want to avoid and should avoid getting involved directly in attacks on Iranian soil. And look, I mean, this entire situation in the Middle East has been far too violent. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you have not just the war in Gaza, but you have these kind of ongoing proxy wars across the region. I think the U.S. has to find a pathway to try to support a de-escalation here, because the current course is not good for anybody, and it's not good for U.S. interests either.
President Biden's critics might say, look, it's because the US looked weak in its support for Israel that Iran is going to take its chances.
No, I mean, frankly, I'd come at it from the other direction, which is that the support that the U.S. has provided, and President Biden provided over many months of the Israeli attacks in Gaza, and this kind of ongoing proxy war between Israel and Iran, just this is what happens. This is where conflict leads. When you've had attacks back and forth in Syria, in Iraq, and across the region between the U.S. and Israel and Iranian proxies, and you've obviously had the massive military operation in Gaza. This is a tinderbox, and if you continue to throw matches in a tinderbox, it can explode in unpredictable ways. And so I don't think that it's a symptom of the United States becoming more critical of what's happening in Gaza. This is a direct outcome of the Israeli attack on an Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria, which again is a reprisal for Iranian support for proxies that attack Israel. I mean, it's been a tit for tat.
Indeed, but Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has argued for years, hasn't he, that Israel's real war is not with the Palestinians, but with Iran. And there are some in Israel who think that this conflict with Iran, particularly in the north of Israel against Hezbollah, cannot be put off.
Well, but I think he's been wrong in his approach over the years. And frankly, we've seen him tolerate, support getting in to Hamas in Gaza over the years. We've seen him, essentially undermine and compel, President Trump to withdraw from Iranian nuclear deal that had put a lid on the nuclear program. Obviously, I was involved in that. At some point, you either are going to do this through war or through some diplomacy and de-escalation. And I worry that for Israel's own interests, having the region continue to cascade in this direction of conflict is not good. There are real problems with Iran's support for these proxy groups. There are real challenges to Israel's security from Hezbollah, from obviously Hamas, and challenges to U.S. interests in places like Iraq as well from Iran's support for proxies. The question is, are you better able to address that in a kind of ongoing shadow war, or do you need to mix that with some diplomacy to de-escalate? And I think you need both pressure and you need some off-ramps here, or else we're just going to be on a road to conflict.
Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Nick.
It's 19 minutes to 8. Let's take another look at the papers. And The Guardian has the story, looks like as a result of a Freedom of Information request from its political editor, Pippa Creer, that Rishi Sunak ordered multiple taxpayer-funded focus groups and polls to craft the messaging of his Eat Out to Help Out campaign in July 2020. It says that the Whitehall departments involved resisted efforts to get the details of the focus groups and polls, but were ordered to do so by the Information Commissioner. 184 individual focus groups carried out over the course of the first 4 contracts. All this, of course, while Rishi Sunak was Chancellor rather than Prime Minister. The Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner is quoted accusing Rishi Sunak of using the research to polish his own image. The Treasury has always said it's justified by ministers as an essential expenditure to shape policy.
Another intriguing story that makes it on the front page of the Times. It's a story that Joe Haynes, former press secretary to Harold Wilson, reveals that the former Prime Minister did have an affair. It was often rumoured, but not with the person that anyone, including Wilson's biographers, knew about. I've been speaking to Joe Haynes, his close ally, the former political secretary to the former Prime Minister, Bernard, now Lord Donahue, who's head of Wilson's policy unit, about that affair, about his decision and Joe Haynes' decision to keep it secret for half a century. We'll hear the full interview in the next hour, but listen now as Lord Donahue describes to me how Wilson, in his inimitable fashion, confirmed his relationship with a woman called Janet Hewlett-Davis during a private conversation.
Towards the end, as he had a lot of time on his hands, he used to take me for walks around number 10 to have a little gossip. On one such walk, he, in a very Wilsonian way, because he wasn't a very direct person, he said he was very pleased I was a friend of Janet. So I, knowing him, know that he wouldn't have raised that unless he'd got some interest or concern. So I knew that he was asking me, did I know about him and Janet? And I replied by saying I thought Janet was a lovely and terrific person. And I then added, in a Wilsonian way, which I had learned from him, and I'm very pleased your relationship is so close and so good. And that way I let him know that I knew. And then he said that she was a lovely person and he'd never been happier.
But that was enough. You understood the code. The code was he was in an affair. The code. He was very happy.
That was the code. But with Harold, it was often codes.
Why did you keep it secret for so long, and why reveal it now?
Well, we kept it secret because we thought it would be used damagingly against them at that time. There's no reason for that now. And we waited until they both died. It was some time ago, and Janet just a few months ago. And also, I felt, as a sometime historian, this was important to go in the historical record of Wilson.
Important because it tells us what, Lord Donahue? What do we learn beyond the fact that Harold Wilson had an affair with someone much younger than him, and that brought him happiness in his last years in Downing Street?
Well, that last bit is what matters. This was a little sunshine at sunset. She obviously made him finally happy, which I had never seen him happy.
Sunshine at sunset is a lovely phrase. You see why he did the job he did, Bernard Donahue, for all those years. Of course, what everyone talked about during Wilson's time in Downing Street, pretty much ever since, is whether the former Prime Minister had an affair with his political secretary, a very powerful woman, Marcia Williams, later Marcia Faulkner. They confirm that affair, at least according to Faulkner, did happen 20 years before this affair. More of that interview later.
Open-mouthed, it is 7:45. If you thought the Roman city of Pompeii, frozen in time after a volcanic eruption engulfed its inhabitants and, of course, preserved its buildings, if you thought it had yielded up all its secrets, then think again. The excavation of a previously undiscovered part of the city has revealed not just stunning artworks and ornate mosaics, but a very grand banqueting hall, a so-called black room in one of the villas. Let's get the first word on this from Gabriel Zugtriga, archaeologist and director of Pompeii Archaeological Park. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Could you tell me first of all about the villa that you've been working at?
Well, I'm actually standing in this room, which is part of a bigger excavation to restore and preserve the site better in the future. And it's almost as big as a classroom you can imagine. It has a white floor, mosaic floor, and black walls. This was because they had dining parties here in the evenings, and they had lamps, and the smoke should not have been seen on the walls, so they just painted them in black. And they had also some beautiful scenes from Greek myth painted on these black walls.
So the walls are black to cover up what might have been some smoke pollution, but you can still see very clearly the paintings which those dining would have been resting their eyes and enjoying themselves with.
And it's on one side, it's the god Apollo, the oracle god of music, with Cassandra, who could see the future but could not change it. Nobody believed her, so it's a terrible fate, and she would be then raped during the invasion of the Greeks in Troy and then brought as a slave to Greece. And on the other hand, on the other side, we see a couple also linked to the war of Troy. It's Helen and Paris. So they are actually maybe the cause of the war, because they run away. It's almost like Juliet and Romeo. She's a Greek woman, the most beautiful woman of Greece, and he's a Trojan prince, and their love goes beyond the borders, and this then causes her husband to call on the other Greeks and go to Troy and destroy the city after 10 years.
Do you have any idea about the ownership of the villa in which you're standing?
But we don't have a name so far, but I think it must have been one of the local, big man politicians' affairs. We know that in Pompeii every year they voted, so they were always campaigning, and they used private homes, dining rooms to make political campaigning. They invited many guests. I think 30 people could find place here easily. And they would use the atmosphere of the dining parties and talking about the Greek images and myth and stories, and somehow adapt them to their experience, private but also political and social.
Gabriel Zutrigal, thank you so much, and congratulations on your discovery. You can see more of that, see the room itself, in Pompeii, the new dig, which will begin on Monday 15th of April at 9 o'clock on BBC Two and of course on iPlayer.
11 minutes to 8 now, and time for Thought for the Day. The speaker this morning, joining us in the studio, is Senior Rabbi of Masorti Judaism, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good morning. We've entered the Hebrew month of Nisan, when a special blessing is said over blossoming fruit trees to God, who created this world so that it lacks nothing for our benefit and joy. How different from the desolation I've seen in Ukraine and witnessed in Israeli and Palestinian villages. The human cost of war is appalling, but nature also pays a terrible price for our violence, and I fear and grieve for it too. My gorgeous land, wrote a Ukrainian friend after Russia destroyed the Kharkov Dam. The fruits, the tomatoes we grew, gone for a generation. I visit an improvised market in the Kiev suburb. People are buying basics surrounded by bombed out homes. One store sells all kinds of vegetable seeds signifying hope. But an area of Ukraine big as Britain is laid with landmines, meaning sudden death, not growth. Yet we need this earth, its fields, forests, and all its life for the future of everything. An Israeli friend leads me around his kibbutz, Re'im, near Gaza. The name means neighbors, as in love your neighbor. He relives October 7, Hamas's cruel attack. Nearby they took hostages, some 130 even now held captive. Here is a burnt-out home. There his friends were slaughtered. This is the children's garden, empty, gone to weed. A great tree killed in the marauding fire stands, a blackened emblem of that terrifying day. I've seen pictures, but cannot imagine the appalling desolation to which so many thousands of Gazans caught hapless between Hamas and Israel are returning grief-stricken in Kfar Yunis. Another friend takes me to the West Bank Palestinian village of Zenuta, abandoned from fear of settler threats. Wild irises flower, blue in the rough grass. Gone are the people who loved this place. I worry for the safety and future of Israel and the whole region. I pray that none of these beautiful lands will be destroyed, for the earth must be our healing. It transcends our transience. Trees breathe life. Each spring hope uncurls with their unfurling leaves. I've planted for the dead. My garden has a tree for the Gazan doctor's 3 daughters killed in the previous war. We've stood by it in testament, together. But I long to plant for the living. It must not be beyond imagining that on a day not just of sorrow but also of determination and joy, when, God willing, the hostages are freed and this terrible war is ended, with Israeli and Palestinian companions, we'll plant trees and fields together.
That was Thought for the Day with Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. Time now 8 minutes to 8.
Might there be light at the end of the tunnel for Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, who, following its publication of a huge trove of US military files in 2010 and 2011, is being pursued by the United States authorities for espionage. Today marks the 5th anniversary of Mr. Assange's imprisonment in Britain. The US is trying to extradite him, but Joe Biden yesterday suggested that America's long pursuit of Mr. Assange may be called off. Stella Assange is Julian Assange's wife. Good morning.
Good morning, Johnny.
Do you take heart from President Biden's comments?
Well, I think it's a good sign. The Prime Minister of Australia overnight said that he is optimistic, so it looks like things could be moving in the right direction. And obviously, after not just 5 years in Belmarsh High Security Prison, but 14 years since he effectively lost his freedom right after publishing this trove, then lots of people around the world, the Pope, press freedom groups have been saying for years that this case should be dropped, that it is a danger to press freedom.
The comment and the suggestion that the hunt for your husband may be called off comes at an interesting time, doesn't it? Because the UK courts, who are pondering the extradition request, are waiting for an assurance from the US authorities that the death penalty wouldn't be used before they rule on the extradition request itself.
Yes, that's right. The High Court gave Julian a kind of conditional leave to appeal and asked the US for so-called assurances in relation to the death penalty and also in relation to the First Amendment protections, because they identified that he is being charged for publishing these documents which evidenced war crimes, and that the United States itself in its arguments has said that he may not be able to use the constitutional protections on press freedom because he's an Australian citizen and not an American. So this is two issues that the court has identified as obstacles to his extradition. It doesn't take away the fact that he is being charged for publishing truthful information that revealed state criminality.
I mean, the critics of your husband attack the way that he published the material. They say it jeopardized lives, and that negates his claim to be a journalist and therefore to have free speech protection. I mean, his supporters, of course, say this is about, as you do, about revealing wrongs.
Yeah, and we categorically deny any claim that he did not publish responsibly. He published and took every measure of care. There has been a lot of talking points from the Pentagon claiming otherwise, but under oath the United States has had to admit that they have seen no evidence of any person coming to physical harm as a result of these publications. What we do know is that these publications revealed this physical destruction and death of tens of thousands of innocent people, and that is really what's at the basis of this. It was embarrassing, and it gave evidence of state cover-ups, of death squads, of torture, and Julian embarrassed the United States. The United States wants to extradite him and has kept him in prison because of it. But I must say, this is a prosecution that is from the Trump era. It's a Trump legacy, and really Joe Biden should have dropped it from day one. His predecessor, Obama, which Biden was part of that Obama administration, decided not to pursue this prosecution. They said there was a New York Times problem, as they called it, that it would set a precedent that could be used against the rest of the press because it criminalizes journalistic activity, news gathering, and that's why Obama didn't pursue it and commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. Chelsea Manning was the source, the leaker, and Julian is the publisher.
May I ask how Julian is?
Well, he's extremely unwell. He's stressed, obviously, because he could be extradited to the United States to face 175 years in prison. This is also the country which, under the Trump administration, there are very credible reports that he was this victim of a murder plot that the CIA was hatching. So the country that has plotted to assassinate him is still able to extradite him, and I hope Joe Biden really just drops this case now, as the entire human rights community and press freedom community is asking him to do.
We'll leave it there. Stella Assange, thanks very much.
2 minutes to 8, time for the weather. Here's Elizabeth Rosini.
No, thank you. Well, things will be turning warmer for most of us as we go through the next day or so. Lots of dry weather, some sunshine, a nice ridge of high pressure, but it's still going to be cloudier out towards western coasts in particular, and there will be some hill fog around as well. It's a very mild start to the day this morning. Some mist, some fog across the southwest at the moment, across southern England and South Wales, and we'll keep the low cloud here, I'm afraid, for much of the rest of the day, although it could brighten up at times. It's a cloudy start, but there will be some more sunshine emerging across northern England and into the Midlands and East Anglia as well. A small chance of 1 or 2 showers developing across northwest England. Northern Ireland is dry for much of the day, some rain arriving later on through the afternoon and into the evening, but a mixture of cloud and sunny spells before then. And for Scotland, then it's quite a cloudy start, again very mild out there for most. Patchy drizzle and some general mist and murk, some sunny spells emerging particularly out towards the east, and it should stay dry. It's quite breezy today, a brisk southwesterly wind blowing, highs of 15 to 19 degrees Celsius, but I think some spots will see 20 degrees. It's most likely for parts of Norfolk, the East Midlands, perhaps Lincolnshire as well. And then tonight we're going to see some rain just lifting northwards across Northern Ireland into central and southern Scotland. Very mild tonight, lows of 9 to 12 degrees.
Coming up in the next hour, the latest on the threats coming from Iran, the health secretary on whether the Tories will ever meet that promise to cut waiting lists, and much more from Harold Wilson's close advisor Bernard Donahue on the extraordinary news of the secret affair the former Prime Minister had that has been kept secret now for half a century.
You are listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Johnny Diamond. It's 8 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of April. The headlines this morning: the United States has promised ironclad support for Israel as fears rise of an imminent Iranian attack. Detectives have charged a man with the murder of a woman who was stabbed in Bradford whilst out with her baby. A daily pill to treat chronic migraines is to be made available on the NHS in England, and Pompeii yields more of its buried treasures, a banqueting room painted black and decorated with frescoes. The BBC News is read by Alan Smith.
President Biden has promised Israel ironclad support from the United States as fears grow that Iran may be about to retaliate for an attack that killed senior Iranian commanders. The strike in Syria at the start of the month destroyed an Iranian consulate building. Yesterday, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, vowed to punish what he called the evil Israeli regime. Israel has refused to be drawn on whether it carried out the attack. Our correspondent in Washington, Will Vernon, reports.
President Biden warned that the Iranians were threatening to launch a significant attack on Israel, which US officials fear could happen any day. Concern has been growing in Washington over the increasingly aggressive rhetoric used by officials in Tehran, who have vowed to retaliate for the alleged Israeli airstrike against an Iranian consulate building in Damascus. Mr. Biden said that American support for Israel was ironclad, and the US would do all it can to protect the security of its ally. US officials are keen to send a very public message to the Iranians that despite differences of opinion between Mr. Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the conduct of the war in Gaza, any attack on Israel will be met with a forceful response by Washington.
Reports in the United States say an American general is due to visit Israel today to discuss Washington's fears about an attack by Iran. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen, who's in Jerusalem, told us the situation was unpredictable.
Iran tends to move in quite unexpected ways, and the suggestion that they might, almost by appointment, launch a missile strike directly on Israel in the teeth of these warnings from America, when the Iranians have made it very clear they do not want an all-out war in the Middle East. I think that's unlikely. I think they will respond, because they've said so often that they must. but it might not be the way that people are expecting it, nor indeed when.
West Yorkshire Police have charged a man with the murder of Kulsuma Akhtar, who was stabbed in Bradford while pushing her baby in a pram. Habiba Massoum, who's 25 and from Burnley, will appear before magistrates later today. Louisa Pilbeam reports.
Kulsuma Akhtar, who was 27, was attacked in Bradford city centre on Saturday afternoon. She was taken to hospital where she later died. Her baby was unharmed. Habiba Massoum was arrested on Tuesday, 170 miles away in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. Last night he was charged with murder and with the possession of a bladed article. 4 men who were arrested on suspicion of helping an offender remain in custody.
37 organisations that support homeless people have written to the Home Secretary James Cleverly, urging him to reconsider plans that could see rough sleepers in England and Wales moved on, fined or arrested. The Home Office has described current legislation as outdated. Our political correspondent Peter Saul reports.
Charities including Crisis, Amnesty UK and The Big Issue are warning that plans to tackle what's described as nuisance, rough sleeping and begging risk stigmatising people who are forced to spend the night on the streets. Dozens of Conservative MPs share those concerns and are threatening to vote in favour of amendments to the Criminal Justice Bill when it returns to the Commons. The Home Office says the legislation replacing the 200-year-old Vagrancy Act focuses on antisocial behaviour and won't criminalise anyone for simply having nowhere to live. Ministers have been holding talks with backbenchers to try to keep them on side, and the potential rebels are confident of securing concessions when Parliament returns from its Easter break. The government is likely, for example, to tweak the wording of the bill to allay concerns people could be moved on because they smell.
A verdict is expected in Vietnam in one of the world's biggest cases of bank fraud. Prosecutors say a wealthy property developer in Ho Chi Minh City, Truong My Lan, swindled the Saigon Commercial Bank out of more than $40 billion. She's denied the charges but faces a possible death sentence if convicted. Here's our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head.
Everything about this case is huge. Not just the staggering sums of money allegedly siphoned out of one of Vietnam's largest banks by 67-year-old Truong My Lan, but also the number of defendants, 86, the 2,700 people summoned by the court, and the 6 tons of documents submitted as evidence. The trial has been covered in minute detail by the Vietnamese media. The authorities are making it a showcase of their anti-corruption campaign, which has now run for 8 years under the leadership of the veteran Communist Party chief Win Phu Trong. He believes public anger over corruption in one of the world's fastest growing economies poses an existential threat to the party's monopoly on power.
An education think tank is warning that schools in England could lose more than £1 billion in government funding by the end of the decade because falling birth rates are leading to fewer pupils. The Education Policy Institute, which aims to raise classroom standards, says some schools could be forced to close or merge with neighbours to remain financially viable. Simon Jones reports.
The Education Policy Institute says as pupil numbers fall, schools will become more strapped for cash. It predicts that by 2030, even if schools receive a real terms increase in funding per pupil of 0.5% each year, the budget for primary and secondary state schools will fall by £1 billion compared with current levels due to demographic changes. The Institute warns that smaller class sizes do not bring about proportional decreases in staff costs and energy bills, meaning some institutions will struggle to stay viable. The National Association of Head Teachers said any cuts would be a catastrophe for children. The Department for Education described the think tank's figures as speculative, adding that school funding was being increased next year to more than £60 billion, which it described as the highest level ever in real terms per pupil.
A new treatment for migraines could soon be available on the NHS in England. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence has recommended atogepant for those who have unsuccessfully tried other drugs to try to prevent migraines. The tablet will at first only be prescribed by specialist doctors in hospitals. The drug's already available in Scotland. Rob Music from the Migraine Trust told this programme the new pill shouldn't be thought of as just a strong painkiller that everyone with migraines can have.
You can't just be given it straight away, so you would have had to have failed 3 other preventive treatments first before you were eligible for this one. I know there are conversations about should treatments like this be almost first line rather than end line, because historically, before this and similar treatments that are available, the treatments that were for other conditions such as epilepsy, for depression, people offered beta blockers, quite nasty side effects.
Archaeologists excavating in the Roman city of Pompeii have uncovered stunning artworks in a villa. The walls of its large banqueting room are decorated with frescoes of figures from Greek mythology, while the floors are covered in mosaics. Pompeii, near Naples, was buried after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Our science correspondent Jonathan Amos sent this report from the excavations.
It's a painstaking process to remove the tons of pumice and ash that smothered this town almost 2,000 years ago. This is the biggest dig in a generation, and each day it's turning up surprises. The latest is an imposing black and white reception hall where Pompeii's elite would likely have gathered to entertain and eat. Its walls display exquisite frescoes based on events that triggered the Trojan War. Helen, the world's most beautiful woman, is seen meeting her suitor Paris for the first time. Pompeii is the best window we have on the people and culture of the Roman Empire. The problem for archaeologists is not finding its treasures, but working out how to conserve them for future generations also to enjoy.
The director of the Pompeii Archaeological Park, Gabriel Trigal, told us he didn't know who the villa belonged to, but the banqueting room would have served a political as well as social purpose.
It must have been one of the local big man politicians. We know that in Pompeii every year they voted, so they were always campaigning, and they used private homes, dining rooms to make political campaigning. They invited many guests. I think 20-30 people could find place here easily.
And the BAFTA Games Awards are being held in London tonight. The ceremony honours outstanding creative achievement in video games. Gaming sales in the UK hit £4.7 billion last year, though the industry is still seen as lagging behind television and film when it comes to wider cultural appreciation.
Alan, thank you. It's coming up to 8:10. NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. That was the promise Rishi Sunak made when he became Prime Minister. Ever since, those waiting lists have suddenly refused to fall. Waiting lists which, remember, had doubled under the Conservatives even before the pandemic hit and before strikes disrupted the health service. Well, later this morning, the NHS in England publishes the latest waiting list data, and we'll also get some other figures which will be interesting on how long people have been waiting to be seen in A&E. There's some hope, as we heard in the last hour of this programme, that figure may come down a little as there's been a big drive to incentivise hospitals to deal with those who arrive seeking emergency care and to look after them more quickly. Let's get the latest from Victoria Atkins, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, who joins us on the line from Westminster. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, we're in that awkward situation where you've seen the figures and we haven't, and you can't tell them us. But let me ask you something you can tell us. Will Rishi Sunak have met his promise to cut waiting lists since when he became Prime Minister, when these figures come out?
Well, again, I'm in difficulties, as you say, but what I can refer to is the fact that in the last 4 months we have seen waiting lists fall, and that is, as you rightly say, despite the fact we've had some really quite, damaging industrial action by junior doctors, and all of the impact that has, not just in terms of people's treatment on the day in hospital, but also, of course, the preparations running up to industrial action, people not being booked in or their appointments being cancelled, and then the aftermath of industrial action where those clinicians, those nurses and other professionals who have gone into work, picked up the slack during the strikes, they then of course need time to rest and recover from that.
Waiting lists have been falling for 4 months. Let's guess that they're probably likely to fall this month, but we can guess something else, can't we? With absolute certainty, waiting lists will still be higher than when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. He will have failed to deliver his pledge.
Well, I don't think anyone